Today is the International Day for Disarmament and Non-Proliferation Awareness Day on March 25. IMAP Austria is the International Media Association for Peace and was founded in February 2020 as a new part of Universal Peace Federation. The guidelines are mainly to uphold the following principles and objectives: promote self-governing, socially responsible and moral media, restore credibility of journalism by scrupulously pursuing accuracy, clear attribution from credible sources, fairness with inclusion of opposing viewpoints, removing personal bias from news articles, avoiding content that is degrading, and practicing respect for the dignity of our audience. Today I am pleased to welcome Lily Gundaker. She is a former nuclear security data assistant at the International Atomic Energy Agency in Vienna. She is specializing in data management, transparency, and international cooperation in nuclear security. With experience in the United Nations and NGO sectors, she has deep appreciation and respect for disarmament, non-proliferation, and global security. She is about ethical governance and international collaboration. She advocates for a world free from nuclear threats. Dear Lily, a heartfelt welcome. You want to say some additional words? And otherwise we start. I have some questions to you.
Okay, about myself, I'm Australian. I was born in Australia and my parents come from Czechoslovakia. I'm living in Austria now, where I've been living for over 30 years. So I'm a retired international civil servant, the former data assistant in international at the International Atomic Energy Agency for nuclear security, as Hans said. And I've first-hand experience in managing critical data, ensuring transparency, enhancing security protocols within the global nuclear framework. And my work in contact database management played a key role in preventing fraud, money laundering, improving accountability, and facilitating international cooperation, particularly in nuclear security. Before and after my work at the IAEA, I've invested in activities at the Women's Federation for World Peace, supporting NGO work at the UN. In 2007, I gave the NGO statement at the CTBTO conference here in Vienna on behalf of 43 NGOs worldwide. And I still remember as I read the prepared speech, it was prepared by somebody else, getting all emotional at the part where I refer to our future generations. As a mother of 5 children, I'm particularly sensitive to what legacy we are leaving behind for all of our children. So, yeah, Hans, you can go ahead and start asking the question.
Yeah, thank you very much for your personal input, because then it's more easy to really see the background of you, not just what you did, but also the motivation behind. And yeah, on the International UN Day of Disarmament and Non-Proliferation Awareness, they say in their own words and statement that it seeks to promote better awareness and understanding of disarmament issues among the public, especially for young people. Because I think many young people cannot remember or they haven't experienced the times of war and conflict, especially in our Western countries. And that's why it is to really raise this awareness more so it's a good opportunity. So let's dive in with some questions. And my first one would be, as you worked in the United Nations International Atomic Energy Agency in Vienna, what was your experience?
You have triggered me already. when you talked about the young generation not understanding, it reminds me, my parents came to Australia after World War II. Here in Europe, the issue of the war, and in Austria in particular, the Nazi background, when you talk about the need for the younger generation to understand the history, that is just so critical. And it's definitely quite true that we need to realize how important education and historical education is. Very important. And often our subconscious bias, our prejudice, is actually a result of historical factors which we may not even be aware of. So, yeah, in the text that I prepared, when you thankfully gave me these questions beforehand, that was exactly my point. But it's just come out. I grew up in Australia to Czech parents who left Czechoslovakia due to communism after the Second World War. And my parents were called New Australians because they weren't born in Australia. I never heard about foreigners or illegal aliens while I was growing up. My neighbours came from all parts of Eastern, Central and Southern Europe. There were hardly any Australian-born Australians in my neighbourhood where I grew up in the western suburbs of Melbourne in the 1950s and 60s. I remember meeting somebody who had cooperated with the UN in the 1980s in Canberra and thought, wow, I'd love to work at the UN. And I was secretary of the Professors World Peace Academy in Canberra, and also became president of the Canberra Friends of Solidarity group. And we were supporting Lech Walesa and people who had been affected by the situation in communist Poland at that time. And one of our members had a daughter who worked at the UN in Geneva. And I realized there are options. So once I actually got to the UN here in Vienna, it was like a dream come true. It was, when you ask about my general experience, I can go on and on and on and on and on about all the general experiences. But for me, it was something that I had longed for and aimed for and determined to do and worked hard to finally get there. And so I was very happy to meet colleagues at the UN to finally be successful in the job application, but then to also realize these people, my colleagues, really were special. Some people had 4 or 5 or even 6 languages and were so, I have to say, they were intelligent people. They were really gifted. However, all humans and all with their idiosyncrasies, and many people where I recognize, hey, I can't get along with that person and this person. And there were always individual and personal and cultural and religious differences. So, but I loved it. I loved the international environment, and I guess it reminded me of home because I grew up in such an international environment.
Yes, thank you very much, Lilith, for your heartwarming insight from your personal history, because not everyone has this kind of experience, I believe. In which field you worked in, you described it already a little bit, and what was your experience from that in more detail?
I started at the UN in 2009 in the publications department. And I remember my interview where I asked about the publications because I thought you could get everything for free. And it's true. All the publications from the IAEA, I was applying at the IAEA, are available for free download on the website. But the publications department also had, I was an invoicing clerk at the beginning, and we were selling documents. So some people want a printout, a book, a published book. And I was working in that department just to replace somebody who was on another mission for a couple of months. So I had very short-term contracts. And my whole 10 years at the UN was short-term contracts. I had 13 contracts altogether. So I never had the real financial and job security that many other people have in other jobs and positions. But I knew this is where I'm meant to be, and I loved being there, and invested everything into that and made the most of the situation, even though I never had beyond 2 years in a row that I could work and have confidence that I had job security until my last contract, where I worked until I retired. So in my first assignment at in the publications department, I shared an office with a Frenchman, and I had traveled as an Australian to Europe and traveled around Europe and worked in Switzerland. And I remember when I traveled through France, I did not appreciate my experience in Paris or in France in general, because I got lost and asked for advice and didn't speak French. And I was not very happy with the French people. So sharing this office with this French guy, it was an amazing experience for me. It was a healing, a total reversal, because he was helping me. We were supporting one another. We were working together, and all of my former prejudice dissolved. But, you know, my parents met in France. They got married in France. I visited the place where they got married, and that was a nice experience. So this was one interesting aspect of the work at the UN, that I recognized it's not just the organization or the job, but yourself and what you've gone through, and my own personal experiences and prejudices, and how I learned to overcome my own prejudice and to work in cooperation with my colleague. After my first 2 short-term contracts in the publications department, I started in the Office of Nuclear Security. At that time, it was the Office of Nuclear Security, and that was founded as a result of 9/11. In the IAEA, the Safeguards Department was started after Chernobyl, and the Nuclear Security Department was started after 9/11 to secure radioactive and nuclear materials, to make sure they never get into the wrong hands and get misused for evil purposes. So I was told, when I was given the opportunity to apply for the position in nuclear security, that the director of nuclear security was tough but fair, but she was a woman. And as a mother of 5 kids, I was not afraid of hard work. So this tough woman was no problem for me. We got on very, very well. And I really loved my work in the Office of Nuclear Security, which then, during my work there, turned into the Department of Nuclear Security in the Division of Nuclear Safety and Security.
Yeah, interesting to hear these unknown details for me, and maybe also for many others. And as I understood, there are many key programs in the International Atomic Energy Agency. And which one is, in your opinion, the best and should be developed further in order to pursue disarmament?
So on this International Day of Disarmament and Non-Proliferation, you have already touched on the fact that disarmament by the UN focuses on the prevention of WMD, weapons of mass destruction, which means the nuclear weapons. However, to me, disarmament speaks of no weapons. Get rid of all the weapons. And yes, I would love to get rid of all weapons, but if we don't have any weapons, we need to make sure we are all safe and secure. And I definitely believe that the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, are defined to guide us into developing a world where we take care of each other's needs to the extent that we can have the security that we need to be able to abolish all weapons. However, when we talk about nuclear weapons, or WMD, weapons of mass destruction, I believe we should get rid of all nuclear weapons. I don't see any justification for any nuclear weapons anywhere. And the CTBTO was founded, the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty Organization, to prevent even the testing of nuclear weapons. So I believe the CTBTO plays an important role in the detection of the testing. They have the seismic counters all over the world where they even detect the coming earthquakes. So we see that this initially designed for prevention of war, this instrument, the CTBTO, the seismic monitoring, now gives us a lot of tsunami warnings and other opportunities. We see developments from something which may have been very negative through, for example, our AIDS pandemic, AIDS, COVID pandemic, has brought us this opportunity of Zoom and international cooperation in a way undreamed of 5 years ago. And as I mentioned, the Division of Nuclear Security started out after 9/11. And since then, nuclear security has become very intense and sophisticated and refined to an extent that we now can detect when you travel anywhere at the airport and you have to go through very narrow gates to the lift or to the stairs. The two pillars on each side are actually nuclear detectors, checking through all of your luggage and through all of everybody who passes between these two pillars to make sure, just to see whether there's any nuclear material on you, to see if you're perhaps transporting nuclear materials. So key programs, SDGs, United Nations, IAEA. A human body has a head, a nose, 2 eyes, 2 ears, fingers, toes, heart, lungs, liver. I believe we all have to work together, just as the IAEA is often even considered not the United Nations, but it is in the family of the United Nations. And I believe all of these instruments play in together. And the key focal point that we need to have, I would actually promote the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, as the overall blueprint that we need to focus on, because when people have security, then they can take care of themselves and of each other, and then we can focus on solving the other problems, which are, for me, the key areas are actually the character education, the relationships, the communication. Before I started working at the UN, I was a communication trainer, and I still see that as my key focal area of expertise, communication. When my supervisor at the IAEA asked me to become the staff association representative, representing the 70 staff members at that time in nuclear security in the staff council, after I had come back from a compulsory break, I was out of the office for a month, and I came back, and he came up to me and he said, "Lily, we want you to apply. I want you to apply to be staff association representative." And I recognized it was myself as the contact data management person. I had connected to every person in the department. I made sure that I knew that all their data, all their information in the database was correct. It meant that I knew the name of the person in the far corner who had just arrived from Pakistan, who hadn't even spoken to anybody. And I knew his name, and I knew when he arrived, and I knew whether he had, what sort of a contract he had. And my colleague who had been working in the department for 5 or 10 years didn't know this person existed, didn't know his name, didn't care, actually. So for me, the issue was the relationships, the connection, and what came from that, the communication. And when my boss, who asked me to be the staff association representative, And I was just an admin staff. We have P&G staff, general staff. And I roped in a professional staff member to also become a candidate, and the member then representing the whole division of nuclear safety and security in the staff council. And she thanked me later for bringing her into it, and I was very grateful. And I recognized that it was this aspect of the communication of caring and talking about it and showing that you care. So there are technical cooperation, which very much assists the developing countries in their development. And there is a nuclear security where we make sure we have prevention, detection, and response of nuclear threats. And I was working in the information management in the nuclear security. And the safeguards make sure that all of the actual physical materials are in place and doing their job correctly. And it's a play, an interplay. Everything has to work together, just like in a family. Only with a man and a woman, a father and a mother, can a child grow up in a healthy relationship.
Yeah, nice that you make the connection to a family, because disarmament in United Nations terms, what does it mean and what effect would have it in our society? Because I think also disarmament should happen also in the families, as you mentioned. And so what do you think about that? What effects it would have on our society to be unarmed, for example?
Well, I love your parallel. So my question immediately, my mind is racing. So how to disarm our weapons in the family, in our personal relationships? Because for sure, the disarmament in UN terms, as I mentioned, focuses on nuclear weapons of mass destruction, but actually legally, the legal terminology refers to all types of weapons. And how to disarm one another in our relationships, I believe, is showing that love, that concern, and being heard. And just as in the individual human relationships, we need to feel like we are being heard. Hey, I'm just thinking of an interview that I heard a week ago, and did each person representing national, international parties and interests, did they feel heard? Did they feel understood? The disarming is overcoming the prejudice, even the subconscious bias, and recognizing somebody for who they are, for who they think they are, and who they want to be. So I think this is, you've triggered me again, this issue. How do we disarm one another to create peaceful relationships, peaceful families? And just as we need love in our individual relationships, that being heard, being listened to, being understood. And I come back to the SDGs. When a nation has clean water, no poverty, gender parity, when we have the things that we need, the pure environment and the energy that we need to live a fruitful, successful life, then we don't need to shoot at one another to take the meat out of your fridge to feed ourselves and our children, or the bread from the baker on the street.
Yeah, very true. This I think it's connected to real life, in personal life. It's not just something abstract on the state level or world level, as you explained. And but still, my question is, how can states and governments be motivated to agree to disarmament? What do you think?
It's honestly a mystery to me how we have permitted the world stage to get to such a massive escalation of nuclear weapons, even though the last few years, I don't believe we're at the peak anymore. The whole point with disarmament, with nuclear disarmament in particular, is that you will then need to ensure that all the nuclear materials that have been invested into nuclear armaments, with the dismantling, that it remains in, do we say government control? In the IAEA was established to be sure that all nuclear material is always under valid control, that it never gets into the hands of terrorists or unauthorized persons. So when we have governments that have a separate agenda, it's very, very difficult. So I can't make any judgments about individual governments. The UN body was created with the 193 member states who have agreed to the Charter of the United Nations to build peace and work on a peaceful world. The whole issue of self-defense is again the issue of relating to each of the others who have often different values, different customs, different cultures, different background. So I believe there too, again, we need education and communication, just as we're trying here now to educate perhaps our younger generation, but we also need the intercultural education and communication to recognize, what does security mean to me? Does it mean having a family? Does it mean having a house? Does it mean having a garden? What is security? Does it mean having a husband or a wife or a child? We need to recognize the needs and the values of individuals all the way through to the cultures, to the nations. And governments will be motivated. You know, who is the voice of the government? At the UN, it's the ambassador of his country who speaks on behalf of his government. And I have seen good relationships with ambassadors, and that ambassador represents his government. So my concept is, oh, that government is a good one. But so much is still determined by the individual relationships and the people that we vote into government to be our representatives, and then the individuals that the government then chooses to send as its representatives, as ambassadors, to the United Nations or to the other bodies related to these particular areas of interest and responsibility. So we talk about states and governments, it still all boils down to people. And what I love about my work at the UN now, especially with the NGO, is that we are constantly working with member state, with the ambassadors, with the representatives, with the people who come from all over the world, or the ambassadors that are representing their mission here in Austria, in their embassies and consulates. And they represent their government at the particular meetings at the United Nations. And we can relate to them as individuals. And as an NGO, as civil society, we have an option to represent normal people. And often when we have a government position, it's quite a heavy burden because we represent something much, much bigger and much more formal. However, the relationships are still interpersonal relationships. They're still the human relationships. So it's a matter of fulfilling the needs. And I come back again to the SDGs.
Yeah, that's very well described, I would say. And partly you answered my next questions already. It goes about security, especially USA, I would mention, because in some areas it's quite low, and in other countries it's also similar. And people want to have security, as you said. This is one aspect as like a precondition of disarmament, because if the governments cannot provide security, then people don't want to disarm themselves. In the opposite, they want to arm themselves. Even maybe it's a false security to have arms, to believe that I can defend myself and my family or whatever. I think maybe it's sometimes a little bit tricky, this question. But anyway, many people in America think like this, looks like. So what do you think? Should all people be disarmed? Or is it, as you say, if there is a security, of course, absolute security is maybe impossible, but at least that people can walk freely in the evening, and you send your daughters and your boys to some like sports training without being worried that they will be attacked somewhere on the way. What do you think? What is disarmament in this stage? What does it mean for the general public?
You made reference to the USA and whether they should be disarmed. You are treading on very thin ground when you want to tell the Americans that you want to take away their weapons because it's in their constitution that they can defend themselves. Do you know how many weapons are in households in Switzerland?
I think almost every household has a weapon because it's the army allows people to take home their weapon, as I understand.
And I have never heard of the accidents or issues in Switzerland as what arise in America. Why?
Good question. Good question. Yeah.
So my take there is it's again the education and fulfilling the needs that we need to be sure that we can take care of our. Well, I believe in Switzerland, the work ethic is very, very strong. I was working in Switzerland for 7 months, and at that time, I remember the Swiss people that I sometimes had 5 days off in a row and went across the border and came to Austria at that time and visited a girlfriend of mine who was working at UNIDO. And my friends in Switzerland told me, the Swiss work to live and the Austrians, no, the Swiss live to work and the Austrians work to live. And it was interesting because definitely I was working 12 hours a day as in a nursing home, and it was tough work, but I loved it. And then exactly this time of year came about. It wasn't called Fasching, it was called Carnival, Fasnacht, and they partied the whole night through. And I remember my colleagues telling me, yeah, we work hard and we play hard and we celebrate. And the people seem to be investing all the time, no matter what they're doing. They're busy. And that's true. I remember another point that came up while I was working in Switzerland. In relation to a similar thing, they told me, and if the neighbor came by while I was in the front garden collecting my mail out of the mailbox, and we would start to talk, we would stand there for an hour or two talking, but we would not come in for a cup of coffee because that's it's not work. It's a waste of time, or it's social, or you don't do that. You don't take it casually. Whereas in Austria, you would go go to the Prater and have a Stelzen and have a you would enjoy gemütliche Wiener Kaffee. You would take the time to socialize. So I don't know, this is just an observation that I had 50 years ago. So I don't even know how relevant it is today. But when I compare the Swiss situation where nearly every household is armed, and the Americans who demand to have their rights to weapons and arms, and we, the outsiders, want to say, hey, no, you shouldn't have any arms, you shouldn't have any weapons. We wouldn't dare do that to Switzerland. We're not going to go into Switzerland and say, give me your rifles or melt them all down. So this right to defend is important, but I believe it's got to be balanced. And there again, I would absolutely separate nuclear and radioactive materials into a category of official control, that it should not be permitted to enter into hands that may misuse it.
Yeah, thank you very much. This is a very balanced answer, I must say. And but nuclear power itself, or the technology itself, is not very sustainable, some people say. So what do you think? Can the world rely on it, or is there some new development necessary, as some say, or there's some, of course, research going on all the time? But at the moment, what do you think? Is it good to concentrate on this technology? Because energy crisis and so on, what we hear every day, and the people think, yeah, it's green energy because it doesn't pollute the air and so on. But generally, what do you think? Is this good or not?
I've been living in this country, in Austria, for over 30 years, and Austria's official policy is anti-nuclear. And then I work at the International Atomic Energy Agency. And for a few years, there was the talk, the accusations that you're promoting nuclear energy, and the IAEA was saying, no, we're not promoting nuclear energy. We are providing the safeguards and the tools and instruments so that those nations that want to use nuclear energy have all the tools and education and resources necessary, that they can have safe nuclear technology and provide safe energy to their populations. In the meantime, the current Director General, I believe he is actually saying we are promoting nuclear energy. And it's only in the last couple of years, at the last COP, with the whole environmental issue, where the IAEA has actually taken that stance that nuclear is the alternative clean green energy. And I really see that the important mission of the IAEA right now is, again, the same as what you're doing here: education and promoting information and identifying and clarifying disinformation, fake news, really to clarify and differentiate. And just as IMAP is trying to do, to locate and identify the sources, it is so important to realize the truth about nuclear energy and all other forms of energy. Do you know how many people have been killed in coal mines and in producing other forms of energy? Hundreds of thousands of people have died over the years in coal mines and in producing all other forms of energy. And do you know how many people have died due to nuclear energy? I'm reading a quote that the civilian mortality from Chernobyl contamination is 15. Mortality means 15 people died from contamination in Chernobyl thus far. In each case, due to thyroid cancer. Operator and first responder mortality from the event is 35. All other known fatalities from nuclear plant operations have occurred among nuclear plant employees and contractors, and the total is 50 over the whole history of the nuclear operations. I had a colleague, a Russian colleague, who went into Chernobyl after the accident. They were called liquidators. The people who went in there to clean up Chernobyl after the accident, they had to liquidate the danger. They had to go in. And of course, the stories that we hear, and even the film Chernobyl, that my colleague said it's a very accurate, not 100%, but it does give a very good idea of what actually happened at that time. And this guy, he was going in for a long, long time, cleaning up the site, and was working with me in the Office of Nuclear Security in Vienna. And he had a couple of other colleagues, similar situation. And then I hear all the fantastic reports on about the nuclear energy and the dangers. And it is true, we need to find the correct storage and processing of nuclear waste. And even that is being taken care of. It's in the process. It's like life. It's a process. Nuclear, when I started in the publications department in 2009, and still today, there is a fusion department. It is really much, much bigger. The nuclear energy comes when the atom is split, the energy that comes through the splitting of the atom. And nuclear fusion is when the atoms join together and all the excess energy provides no waste. It gives us energy, clean energy. And the nuclear fusion is the new way, for me, we are somehow I get the feeling humankind has to create a certain preparation, a certain standard, a certain condition to be able to receive what the solution to nuclear fusion, how to really do it, because is nuclear power a safe technology and the world can rely on it? It will be. There is already so much in place, and we need to make sure that we respect the rules and laws and regulation. When we have a nuclear power plant and the people working there have conditions that are upheld and respected, and they're not made to stay indoors because of other situations outside and to stay on site for 38 hours, 64 hours because they have no opportunity to go out and live a normal life and pursue their normal physical needs, then we are creating a dangerous situation. And that is what the IAEA is working to monitor and to resolve and to take care of. But if we don't empower the instruments which we have already nominated to take care of these things, and if we take away the funding of these instrumental bodies which we have already enabled and empowered to take care, to make sure that these conditions are upheld, they are safe so long as we keep the rules. If we break all the rules and then say, hey, no, you're wrong, that didn't work, it's not fair. It's not fair. We need to be honest and truthful, and we need to communicate properly and educate ourselves and one another. And yes, I say we can rely on nuclear energy, but we need to make sure that we also apply all the safeguards, recognizing the differences in culture, in lifestyle, and the extenuating circumstances in every country around every nuclear power plant, to recognize whether or not we can trust what that situation there is for it to be really safe.
Yeah, amazing how well you describe it. And I remember Chernobyl, our first son was about to be born, and only a few days later we got the information there was a fallout, and somehow we had like eating salads and so on. And later we were quite worried that how it would affect us and our children. But luckily, nothing really happened. But I can imagine that this is a worry, and like you say, this most sustainable technology would be in the nature. Like I believe the sun has this fusion technology already, and is providing warmth and light for us millions of years, and will continue so. So I think just we have to discover this. It's not new. It's just always there. It's even longer there than this old atomic energy, basically. But you rightfully said this is a very it depends on us humans, because mostly it's human failure if some problem come. Of course, not always, but many times it is. And of course, if it's like public spending is cut down so much that you are not able to safeguard something, then it's also human failure, basically, by evaluating the right thing, like you said. And one more final question would be, as you worked in the publication department, as I'm wondering, how is the like press release situation, because publication is very important for like long-term thing, and really people want to read booklets, leaflets, and so on, and whatever reports. But for public interest, I think many times it's important to have press releases, and newspapers and media outlets are taking up this issue. Like education is you mentioned also, if people don't talk about education, then probably it's not an issue to develop education as in discussion groups. Now at the moment in the media is full of politician talks about politics, basically. But what do you think, how to increase or to improve this kind of public relation activity to inform the public about what, for example, the atomic energy is doing, this office, and because what you say, it's really very valuable. What I would like to know, that more people know, maybe they know anyway, but also in the media it is promoted more. What do you think, how this could be developed? I mean, this topic is important for every NGO, basically, you know, to represent themselves in the public and not just do the good works under in secret, but really, how to say, to inform the public. What do you think would be the necessary measures, or is it doing anyway already enough, and just it's for me not so visible or something?
Visibility is the issue. 2009, when I started at the IAEA and joined the publications department, so anybody born at that time would be 16 years old now, and competent with use of the mobile phone, with social media, with issues and technology and devices which were not even on the horizon of those people at that time. And quite honestly, when I joined the IAEA in 2009, I came in with a qualification. I had the ECDL driving certificate for computer competence. None of my colleagues there had it, and some of my colleagues had been working there for 30 years and started when they needed pencil to write shorthand notes in the G stuff. So during the time that I was there, the whole computer literacy project was full underway, but not even compulsory yet. That it wasn't required that everybody. I had to, for my entrance test, I had a typing test. I had to reach a typing speed and accuracy. However, the people who were already in there before me, who had permanent status, didn't have to do any of this. So we're dealing with, some people talk about the UN now being a bit of a dinosaur, that it needs a renewal. And the renewal that it needs is what I see, what we need not only in the UN, in the society in general, is the communication, and what we're doing now, the education, the intergenerational communication. When I started at the UN, when I don't know if I was already on Facebook in 2009, but I remember when we had notices coming through at work that the social media was prohibited. We were not allowed to misuse the computer for these uses during work hours. And I think the issue there was already some people were getting hooked and using the work tech devices for social networking. So that became, I saw the regulations coming through. However, it was okay to go onto Facebook at lunchtime, which I did. And I found that people on UNODC were actually on Facebook for work. They were promoting their programs, their projects, and what they were doing, their activities on Facebook. The times have changed. The last 16 years, even before I retired, there was already a media department and the social media focusing on not only Facebook, but all the other current social media channels. And they have a lot to do. They do a lot. Sometimes our generation isn't there and doesn't see it. And I really see what needs to be done is, again, this intergenerational work. But I would make a plea also to my generation. We need to find a way to stay connected. And it's extremely challenging. The changes that have happened, okay, the 10 years that I was working there, from total prohibition of social networking to implementation of social networks for the job, for the communication. That is done now. The Director General tweets regularly, and you'll find information on Instagram and Facebook. And when you go to the IAEA page, iaea.org, on the very bottom of the page, in the footnote, you'll find all the links to the social media channels. So there is a lot already there, but you have to look for it, and you'll look for it if you know, and if you don't know, you won't, and you won't look for it, you won't find it. And I would send out this plea to each one of us to stay informed, stay alive, be alert, be aware. The same as this meditation right now, awareness and mindfulness. Be aware of what's really going on and catch what's happening, and go down to the bottom, to the footnote. Check out the social media channels. There is a lot already there going on, and it has changed a lot in the last 10 years, in the last 15 years. And personally, I believe it's still going to change a lot more, even in the next few months and in the next year. And so I would highly recommend that we stay in touch, connect, but I really see the intergenerational aspect as being extremely important, because we tend to color things with our own experience. So like I said, when I started, no social media at work, and now it's a part of the job. Quite different.
Yeah, amazing. This is very good insight what you give. And now we are approaching our end of our talk. And I would like, if you want to say something to our viewers, to our listeners, as a final message, or some more thoughts what you have to this topic.
Couple of things that occurred to me that we haven't really addressed when we're talking about nuclear energy and nuclear disarmament. I want to address the costs. And I did some research and discovered that even though the USA spends more on nuclear weapons, Russia spends 3 times the annual UN budget on nuclear weapons alone than what the UN budget is. The total UN budget is $3.5 billion. You know, some people talk about, you know, we don't need the UN, we don't need this, we don't need that, the UN is useless. And we are not enabling the UN. We have been sucking it dry and trying to focus on other things. And just as the SDGs, the Nuclear Security Office was mostly funded by extra budgetary voluntary funds, which means my job was funded by actually the USA, because they are the biggest donor into the Nuclear Security Fund, which is a voluntary fund. So the UN works in such a way that the nations have a proportion that they are allocated to pay according to their population and their status in the world, according to their economic situation. And so this is a set amount for each country to help the UN run. And in the Office of Nuclear Security, we also, actually in the IAEA, there is also a quota system where, according to how much money each country pays into the fund, then they also have the right to that many citizens from that country to be working as employees within the United Nations. So that's why it's more difficult for Austrians to get a job at the UN here in Vienna, because the quota is full. When the UN started here in Vienna, friends got their friends in because there was no internet. They didn't know how else to recruit the people. They put the ads in the newspapers, but they brought all their friends in because they needed these people to work at the UN. Today, the jobs are advertised worldwide. And when they re-advertised my position when I retired the first time, they had to advertise my position because after 7 years of 10, 11 short-term contracts, they finally decided, well, we do need you, so we will advertise your position, because we can't give you a longer contract unless we advertise your position. So they advertised my position, and they had to prove to the Board of Governors that I was the best and only qualified person for this particular job as the data assistant in nuclear security. So the funding comes from extra voluntary budgets. So the Nuclear Security Fund relies on extra funding. And if we are going to keep tapering it down and not paying anything extra, then we won't have the resources to do what we really want to do. And I wanted to just point out that what is spent on nuclear weapons worldwide is more than what is spent on the whole United Nations, not even just on nuclear security, on the whole United Nations. And that's just from one country. And when you take the whole expense, not of defense, but of nuclear, if we just dismantled all of our nuclear arsenals and stopped having to invest in nuclear defense, we could more than fund 10 times the United Nations and use the nuclear energy, the nuclear material, to provide nuclear energy and other research and medical resources that can be put to good. That's my key takeaway for Disarmament Day. Let's get rid of all nuclear weapons and invest all of those developments that have been invested into developing nuclear weapons and nuclear arsenals into building peaceful resources.
Yes, that's a very good final statement, I would say. Thank you very much, Lily, for your time. Bless you, your family, your activities for a better world. Thank you very much.
Thank you.